The day my son loaded my life into a moving truck, I stood in the doorway of the home I'd shared with my late husband for 40 years and watched him avoid my eyes. Careful with that. Olivia called her voice sharp, directing movers through rooms that no longer felt like mine. By noon, everything was gone. Everything. Except one thing. A small locked wooden cabinet sat alone in the middle of the living room. I frowned. Daniel. What about this one? He didn't even look at it, just tightened his jaw and said flatly, "That one's not worth taking. Not worth taking." But the way Olivia grabbed his arm, the way they rushed the movers out right after, that was the moment I realized. That cabinet was the only thing in this house they were afraid of. If you've ever felt something wasn't right in your own family, you'll understand why I didn't let this go. So before you judge what I did next, tell me, would you have opened it? And if you believe secrets always come out eventually, make sure you're here for what comes next. I didn't question Daniel at first. That's what mothers do. We explain things away for our children long before we allow ourselves to see them clearly. It started 3 months earlier on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in my sunroom, the one Michael had built with his own hands, sipping tea and rereading an old novel I'd finished years ago. The house was peaceful in that familiar, comforting way. Every creak of the wood floors, every hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen, all of it part of a rhythm I had learned to love. Then Daniel called. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice unusually warm. "I've been thinking. You shouldn't be alone out there anymore." I smiled even though he couldn't see me. "I'm not alone, sweetheart. I've got my routines, my friends, this house." There was a pause on the line. "Yeah, but it's a lot to manage, isn't it? The upkeep, the bills, all of it." I frowned slightly. Daniel had never concerned himself much with the details of my life before. "I managed just fine," I said gently. "Your father made sure of that." Another pause. Then his tone shifted firmer, more insistent. "Olivia and I talked about it. We think it would be better if you moved closer to us, maybe even with us for a while." That was the first moment something inside me stirred uneasily. Not fear, not yet, just a quiet question. "Why now?" I asked. He exhaled softly as if I were being difficult. "Because we care about you, Mom. That's all." I wanted to believe that, so I did. A week later, they came over for dinner. Olivia walked in first, her heels clicking confidently against the hardwood floor. She kissed my cheek, but it felt more like a gesture than affection. "This place is charming," she said, glancing around. "Very traditional." I knew what she meant. Outdated, old, replaceable. Daniel followed behind her, carrying a bottle of wine. He gave me a quick hug, distracted already looking at his phone. Dinner felt different that night. Not uncomfortable exactly, but orchestrated. Olivia asked a lot of questions about the house, the mortgage, though it had been paid off years ago, the property taxes, my savings, even the insurance policies Michael had set up. At first, I answered casually. Why wouldn't I? She was family, but the more she asked, the more it felt like I was being evaluated. "So the house is completely in your name?" she asked, at one point, her tone light, almost conversational. "Yes," I replied, setting down my fork. Michael made sure of that. She nodded slowly, exchanging a quick glance with Daniel. It was subtle, but I saw it. Later that night, as I cleared the dishes, I heard them whispering in the living room. "It's more than we thought," Olivia murmured. Daniel replied quieter. "Just give it time." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. Families talked about finances all the time. Right. Over the next few weeks, Daniel started calling more often, checking in, asking what I'd eaten, whether I'd taken my medication, if I'd locked the doors at night. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like I was being monitored. Then Olivia began texting me. At first, it was simple things. "Good morning, Grace. Don't forget to drink water today. Have you thought more about moving closer to us?" But gradually, her messages became more directive. "You really shouldn't be climbing stairs alone. That neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be. We found a great assisted living community nearby. Assisted living. I stared at that message for a long time. Was that how they saw me now, fragile? Helpless. In need of supervision, I wasn't. Yes, I was 68. Yes, I lived alone, but I paid my bills, I cooked my meals, I took care of my home. I was still me. When I told Daniel how I felt, he sighed. Mom, it's not about what you can do. It's about what's best for you, according to who I asked quietly. According to us, he said. That was the first time I truly felt it. The shift. I wasn't part of the decision anymore. I was the subject of it. A few days later, Olivia came over again, this time without Daniel. She walked through the house slowly, her eyes scanning everything with a kind of clinical precision. You have a lot of stuff, she said, opening cabinets, peering into drawers. These are memories, I replied. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. But memories can be simplified. That word echoed in my mind long after she left. Soon after, Daniel started bringing up paperwork. Just temporary, he assured me. Power of attorney stuff. In case anything happens. In case what happens, I asked. You never know, he said quickly. I didn't sign anything, not then, but I didn't say no either. I hesitated, and in that hesitation, they moved forward anyway. By the second month, things had escalated. Daniel arranged for a real estate agent to take a look at the house. I was told it was just for an evaluation. Just to know your options, Olivia said sweetly. The agent walked through my home like it was already for sale. This could go for a great price in this market, he said, nodding appreciatively. I stood there invisible in the middle of my own living room. This isn't on the market, I said firmly. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder. Not yet, Mom, not yet. That phrase lingered, like a promise or a threat. That night, I sat alone in the sunroom again, staring out at the backyard Michael had loved so much. The garden was still blooming. The wind chimes he'd hung years ago swayed gently in the evening breeze. For a moment, everything felt normal, until I remembered Olivia's voice. Memories can be simplified. I looked around the room slowly, at the photographs, at the furniture, at the life we had built here, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not confusion, not denial, but fear. Because deep down, I knew they weren't trying to help me. They were trying to take control, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. It didn't happen all at once. If it had, I think I would have fought back sooner. No, what Daniel and Olivia did was far more subtle than that. They didn't take my home from me in a single moment. They did it slowly, piece by piece, until one day I looked around and barely recognized the place I was standing in. It started with the living room. Olivia came over one afternoon carrying a stack of fabric samples and a tablet filled with photos. I was thinking, she said brightly, we could freshen things up a bit, give the space a more modern feel. I blinked at her. She laughed lightly as if I'd made a joke. Well, yes, since we're all going to be spending more time here. Before I could respond, she was already laying swatches across my coffee table. My coffee table, the one Michael had restored himself after finding it at a flea market 30 years ago. This beige is very in right now, she continued. Clean, neutral, easy to work with. I looked at the deep burgundy sofa I had chosen with such care years ago. It wasn't trendy, it wasn't modern, but it was mine. I like it the way it is, I said, keeping my voice calm. Olivia paused just for a second. Then she smiled again, tight controlled. Of course you do, she said, but sometimes a change can be refreshing. Daniel backed her up later that evening. Mom, it wouldn't hurt to update a few things, he said casually, scrolling through his phone. You've had the same setup forever. That's because I chose it carefully, I replied. And because it reminds me of your father. That made him look up. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something flicker in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort. But Olivia reached over and touched his arm, and it vanished just as quickly. We're not erasing memories, Grace, she said smoothly. We're just making the space more livable, as if I hadn't been living there just fine for decades. A week later, I came home from visiting Helen to find my living room rearranged. The burgundy sofa was gone. In its place sat a pale beige sectional, sleek and unfamiliar. The coffee table had been replaced with a glass one. Even the curtains had changed, my thick floral drapes swapped out for sheer white panels that let in too much light. I stood there frozen in the doorway. "Do you like it?" Olivia's voice called from the kitchen. I turned slowly. "Where is my furniture, Oh?" she said, waving a hand dismissively. "We put it in storage. Don't worry, it's safe. Safe. Like something that needed to be protected from me. You didn't ask me," I said, my voice quieter now. Daniel appeared behind her, his expression already defensive. "Mom, we talked about this," he said. "You said you were open to changes." I said I'd think about it, I corrected. "That's not the same thing." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Why are you making this such a big deal, such a big deal?" I looked around the room again at the unfamiliar furniture, the sterile brightness, the absence of everything that had once made this house feel like home. "Because it is a big deal," I said softly, but they were already moving on. That was the pattern. Every time I protested, they minimized it. Every time I hesitated, they took it as permission. And every time I stayed silent, they went further. It wasn't just the living room. Soon it was the kitchen. Olivia reorganized the cabinets, replacing my dishes with matching sets she had purchased online. "These are more practical," she explained, "and they look better together." My mismatched plates, each one carrying a memory of a different time, a different place, were boxed up without a second thought. Then came the bedroom. I walked in one afternoon to find my quilt and the one my mother had sewn by hand folded neatly at the foot of the bed, replaced by a crisp white comforter. "It brightens the room," Olivia said when she saw my expression. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I was starting to understand something I hadn't wanted to admit before. This wasn't about helping me. This was about erasing me. Daniel noticed the change in me, or at least he noticed that I was no longer cooperating as easily. "You've been distant," he said one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I wonder why I replied. He frowned. "We're trying to make things easier for you by taking away everything that's mine." His jaw tightened. "It's not about ownership, Mom. It's about what makes sense. What makes sense for who I asked. For all of us," he snapped. There it was again. All of us. Except it never included me. A few days later, I found something that made everything clearer. I had gone into the hallway closet looking for an old photo album. Instead, I found a stack of papers tucked behind a box. Real estate documents. My heart began to pound as I flipped through them. Comparative market analyses, estimated sale prices, notes about renovations that could increase value, and at the top of one page A listing draft, my address, my home, for sale. I felt the air leave my lungs. They hadn't just thought about it. They had planned it. I didn't confront them right away. I wish I could say it was because I was being strategic, but the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what they would say. Afraid of what it would confirm. Instead, I called Helen. "I think they're trying to sell the house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Grace," she said finally, her tone serious. "I think they've been trying for a while." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "I didn't want to upset you," she admitted, "but I ran into Daniel a few weeks ago. He mentioned something about freeing up assets." At the time, I thought he meant his own finances. Freeing up assets. That's what I was to them. Not a person, not a mother, an asset. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, the new light fixture Olivia had installed casting strange shadows across the room. Every sound felt louder, every thought sharper. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if I was overreacting, because I wasn't. Something was happening, something deliberate, and whatever it was bigger than rearranged furniture or unwanted upgrades. They weren't just changing my home. They were preparing to take it away from me. I just didn't know yet how far they were willing to go. The truth didn't come to me in a dramatic revelation. It came quietly, in a whisper I was never meant to hear. It was late past 10, and I had gone downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dim, the new lighting Olivia had installed, casting a soft, unfamiliar glow across the kitchen. I stopped halfway down the stairs when I heard voices. Daniel and Olivia. They were in the living room. "We don't have much time left." Olivia was saying her voice low but sharp. Daniel sighed. "I know." "No, you don't," she snapped. "The bank is not going to wait forever, Daniel. We're already behind." My heart skipped. Behind, I leaned slightly against the wall, holding my breath. "We just need to move things along." Olivia continued. "Once the house is sold, everything resets. The debt, the pressure, all of it." There was a long silence. Then Daniel spoke again, quieter this time. "She's not ready." "She doesn't need to be ready," Olivia replied instantly. "She just needs to sign." My fingers tightened around the railing. "Sign what she trusts you," Olivia added. "Use that." The words hit me like a physical blow. Use that. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not all at once, but in a slow, painful shift that left no room for denial. This wasn't concern. This wasn't love. This was a plan. And I was at the center of it. I stepped back silently, careful not to make a sound, and retreated upstairs. For a long time, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. They were shaking. Not with fear, but with something else. Clarity. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed. I smiled when Olivia greeted me. I nodded when Daniel asked if I'd slept well. I played the part they expected, but inside, everything was different. Now I was watching them. Really watching. And once I started paying attention, the signs were everywhere. Daniel was more distracted than usual, constantly checking his phone, stepping outside to take calls he didn't want me to hear. Olivia, on the other hand, had become even more efficient. She scheduled appointments without asking me, organized meetings, brought up paperwork casually as if it were just another routine task, just something simple. She said one afternoon, placing a folder in front of me, "We should get this out of the way." I glanced at it. Legal documents. Again. "What is it this time?" I asked. "Just authorization forms," she replied smoothly, "so Daniel can help manage things if needed." "If needed," I repeated. She smiled. "Exactly." I didn't touch the pen. "I'd like to have Mr. Whitaker look at it first," I said calmly. That was the first time I saw her lose control. Just for a second, her smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "That's not really necessary," she said, quickly. "It's all standard." "I'm sure it is," I replied, "but I'd feel better if my lawyer reviewed it." Daniel, who had been standing nearby, stepped in. "Mom, you don't need to complicate this," he said, his tone already tense. "I'm not complicating anything," I said quietly. "I'm being careful." The air in the room shifted. Olivia closed the folder slowly, her movements precise. "Of course," she said, "take all the time you need." But the way she looked at Daniel told a different story. They hadn't expected resistance, not from me. That evening, I called Helen again. "I heard them," I told her. "They're in debt. They're planning to sell the house." Helen didn't sound surprised. "I was afraid of that," she said. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I wasn't sure," she admitted. "And because I hoped I was wrong." I closed my eyes. "You weren't." There was a pause. "Grace," she said gently, "you need to protect yourself. I don't even know where to start." "Yes, you do," she replied. "You start by remembering that this is still your house." Her words grounded me. My house, not theirs, mine. The next day, I went looking for more answers. Not openly, carefully. I started with Daniel's study, a space he had claimed as his own since he began working from home more frequently. I didn't feel good about going through his things, but I didn't feel good about being deceived either. Inside one of the drawers, I found it, a stack of unopened envelopes, final notices, credit warnings, loan statements. The numbers blurred together at first until one figure stood out. $187,000. Debt. My breath caught. This wasn't a small problem. This was desperation. And suddenly everything made sense. The urgency, the manipulation, the pressure to sign. They weren't just being careless. They were running out of options, and I was their solution. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Then I went into the living room and sat down right in the center of the space they had tried so hard to redesign. For a long time, I didn't move. I just thought about Daniel as a little boy running through this house with scraped knees and a laugh that filled every room, about the man he had become, about the choices he was making now, and about the role I had played in allowing it, because I had allowed it, not intentionally, not knowingly, but I had trusted him without question. And he had used that trust, just like Olivia told him to. Use that. The words echoed in my mind again, sharper this time, but something else rose with them, something stronger, resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I was unaware. They thought I would sign whatever they put in front of me. They were wrong. I stood up slowly, my decision settling into place with a calm certainty I hadn't felt in weeks. If they wanted to play a game, then I needed to understand all the rules. And that meant finding out everything, not just about their plans, but about my own. Because there was still one thing in this house they hadn't touched, one thing they had avoided, one thing they had called not worth taking: the cabinet. I turned my head slightly, my eyes drifting toward the corner of the room where it still stood, quiet, unassuming, locked. Whatever was inside it, they didn't want me to see, which meant it was exactly what I needed. The moving truck arrived on a Thursday morning. I knew it before I even opened my eyes. There's a certain sound a large truck makes when it idles too long in front of a house, a low, steady rumble that doesn't belong in a quiet neighborhood. It seeps into your awareness slowly, like a warning you don't want to acknowledge. At first I told myself it couldn't be for me. But when I looked out the window and saw the logo on the side, Midwest Family Movers, parked directly in front of my driveway, I knew. I didn't rush downstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, my hands resting on my lap, listening to the engine outside and the faint sound of footsteps moving through the house. They had already let themselves in. Of course they had. When I finally made my way down, the front door was wide open. Cold air drifted in from outside, carrying the scent of damp pavement and early autumn leaves. 2 men in uniform were standing in the living room, carefully wrapping what little furniture Olivia had allowed to remain. Daniel stood near the doorway, clipboard in hand. Olivia was already giving instructions. "Make sure that box is labeled Kitchen Fragile," she said briskly. "And the bedroom items go together. We don't want anything getting mixed up. As if this were a simple, organized transition. As if this were my decision. I stopped in the hallway unnoticed for a moment, watching them. Watching my son. He looked efficient, focused, like a man doing something necessary, not like a son dismantling his mother's life. Daniel. My voice cut through the room. He turned startled. "Mom," he said quickly, "you're up." "I suppose I am," I replied, stepping forward. "Would you like to explain why there's a moving truck outside my house?" There was a flicker of irritation in his expression, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "We talked about this," he said. "No," I corrected calmly. "You talked. I listened." Olivia stepped in before he could respond. "We're just getting things started," she said smoothly. "It's better this way, less stress for you." "Less stress," I repeated. I looked around the room, the half-packed boxes, the unfamiliar furniture, the strangers carrying pieces of my life out the door. Whose stress are we talking about? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to the movers. "That cabinet goes next," she said, pointing toward a small table near the wall. "Stop." The word came out sharper than I intended. The room fell quiet. "That stays," I added, my voice steadier now. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Grace, we can't just leave things behind." "Watch me," I said. Daniel exhaled heavily. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder, I stepped closer to him. "You show up with a truck without telling me. Start packing my belongings, and I'm the one making things difficult." His jaw tightened. "We're trying to help you." "No," I said softly. "You're trying to rush me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia crossed her arms. "We don't have time to argue," she said. "The lease on our place is ending, Daniel. We need to move forward." There it was, not even disguised anymore. I looked at Daniel. So that's it. You need a place to live, so you take mine. That's not fair, he snapped. Isn't it? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration finally breaking through his composed exterior. We're in a tight spot, okay, he admitted. This solves everything for all of us. All of us, I repeated again. But I didn't argue further, not then, because I could see something in his face that I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. Desperation, not just calculation, not just manipulation. Desperation, and desperation makes people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. It didn't excuse it, but it explained it. I stepped back slowly, folding my hands in front of me. Fine, I said. Both of them looked at me, surprised. Fine, Olivia echoed. Yes, I replied. If this is what you've decided, then go ahead. Relief washed over Daniel's face almost instantly. Olivia's expression softened into something resembling satisfaction, but inside me, something had shifted. I wasn't agreeing. I was watching, learning, letting them believe they had already won. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Boxes were filled, sealed, and carried out. Drawers emptied, closets cleared. Every item that held a memory was reduced to a label and a destination. I stayed out of the way, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I needed to see exactly how far they would go. At one point, Daniel approached me with a sheet of paper. Just sign this, he said. It's for the moving company confirmation and liability. I took it scanning the page. It looked simple enough. But I had learned my lesson. I'll read it carefully later, I said, handing it back. His expression darkened slightly. Mom, later, I repeated. He didn't push further, but I could feel Olivia watching me from across the room, her eyes sharp, calculating. By early afternoon, the house was almost empty. The echoes of footsteps bounced off bare walls. The air felt colder, thinner, like the life had been pulled out along with the furniture. And in the center of it all, the cabinet remained, untouched, ignored, avoided. I walked toward it slowly, my footsteps sounding louder than they should have in the empty space. It was smaller than I remembered. Dark wood, worn at the edges, the brass handle slightly tarnished with age. Michael had always kept it locked. Always. Even when Daniel was young, even when I asked. Some things are meant to stay closed until the right time, he used to say. At the time, I thought it was one of his quirks. Now, I wasn't so sure. Behind me, I heard Olivia's voice. Are we done here? One of the movers nodded. Everything's loaded except that. She interrupted quickly, not even turning to look at it. Leave it. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't even glance at the cabinet. That more than anything told me everything I needed to know. They weren't forgetting it. They were avoiding it. Mom, Daniel said, his tone softer now, almost careful. We'll get you settled at our place. It'll be better this way. You'll see. I turned to face him. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who used to run into my arms after a bad dream, the one who used to promise he'd always take care of me. And then I saw the man standing in front of me now, a stranger wearing my son's face. I hope so, I said quietly. He nodded, relieved again, but as they walked out the door, following the last of the movers, I didn't follow. I stayed where I was, in the empty house, with the one thing they had left behind. The front door closed with a soft, final click. Silence settled in, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to breathe. Because now, finally, I was alone. And whatever answers they had tried to keep from me were still here, waiting, inside that locked cabinet. Silence has a weight to it. I didn't understand that until I was left alone in my own house, stripped bare, emptied of everything except the one thing no one wanted to touch. The cabinet. It sat there in the middle of the living room like it had always belonged there, even though I knew it hadn't. It used to stand quietly against the far wall, half hidden behind an armchair Michael used every evening. It had never drawn attention to itself. Until now. Now it was the only thing left, and somehow it felt like the most important thing in the room. I didn't approach it right away. Instead, I walked slowly through the house, or what was left of it. The living room echoed with every step I took, the absence of furniture turning even the smallest sound into something hollow. The walls, once lined with photographs and shelves, were bare, now ghost outlines still visible where frames had hung for decades. In the kitchen, the cabinets were empty. Even the mismatched mugs I loved, the ones collected from vacations, from friends, from moments that mattered, were gone. Packed, labeled, removed. I ran my fingers along the edge of the counter, remembering how many meals had been prepared there, how many conversations had filled the space, how many quiet mornings Michael and I had shared over coffee. Gone. All of it. Upstairs, it was worse. The bedroom felt unfamiliar, almost cold. The bed frame remained, but without the quilt, without the pillows, without the small personal touches that had made it mine, it looked like a staged room in a house that was no longer lived in. I sat on the edge of it briefly, my hands resting on my knees. This is what they had done. Not just move my belongings, they had erased my presence, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to prove I had ever truly lived here. Except I stood again. Except for one thing. When I returned downstairs, the cabinet seemed to draw me in more strongly than before. I stopped a few feet away from it, studying it carefully. It wasn't large, just under 4 feet tall, with 2 narrow doors and a single drawer at the top. The wood was dark, aged to a deep brown that caught the light in soft, uneven tones. The surface bore small scratches, and marks, each one a quiet testament to time. And at the center, the lock. Simple, old-fashioned, unbroken. I knelt slightly, examining it closer. No signs of damage, no scratches from forced entry. Which meant what Helen had told me was true. Daniel had tried to open it, and failed. That thought sent a chill through me. My son, my own son, had stood here in this same spot, trying to break into something his father had left behind, and when he couldn't, he walked away from it, left it behind, pretended it didn't matter, but it did matter. I could feel it. There was a tension in the air around it, a quiet, almost invisible pressure that made my chest tighten the longer I stood there. "What were you hiding, Michael?" I whispered. The question lingered in the silence. No answer came. Of course not. Michael had been gone for 3 years, but in that moment I felt closer to him than I had in a long time, because this was something he had chosen to leave behind, something he had protected, something he had kept even from me. I reached out my fingers, hovering just above the handle, and then I stopped. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Michael had always been careful, thoughtful, intentional. If he had locked this cabinet, there was a reason, and if he had never given me the key, there was a reason for that too. "When the time comes, you'll know." His voice echoed in my memory, clear as if he were standing right behind me. I closed my eyes briefly. The time. Was this the time I looked around the empty room again? The stripped walls, the hollow silence, the absence of everything that had once made this house a home? Yes. If there had ever been a moment, it was now. Still, I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I stood up slowly and walked toward the front door. For the first time since the movers had left, I stepped outside. The air was cooler than I expected, carrying the faint scent of rain. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of afternoon that felt suspended between something ending and something beginning. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson was watering her plants. She looked up when she saw me. "Oh, Grace," she called gently. "I saw the truck earlier. Are you moving?" I hesitated. Then I smiled softly, carefully. "Something like that," I replied. She nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Well, if you need anything, you know where I am." "I do," I said. And for a moment I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Connection. Real, simple, uncomplicated. Not like what Daniel and Olivia had been offering. Not wrapped in plans or expectations. Just kindness. I stayed outside, a little longer, letting the quiet of the neighborhood settle around me. Because inside the house, everything was about to change. When I went back in, the cabinet was still there, waiting, unmoved, unchanged. I walked toward it again, slower this time, more deliberate. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because I was afraid of what I might find, but because I understood what it might mean. If Michael had left something inside that cabinet, something important enough to protect, then opening it wouldn't just reveal a secret. It would change everything. My understanding of him, of Daniel, of this entire situation. I stopped in front of it once more. The room was completely silent now. Even the faint hum of the outside world seemed distant. It was just me and the cabinet. I reached out again this time, letting my fingers rest against the cool brass handle. Solid, real, unyielding. "All right," I whispered. My voice sounded different, stronger, steadier. Let's see what they didn't want me to find. But as I pulled gently, the handle didn't move. Of course it didn't. It was locked. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh. Not of amusement, but of realization. This wasn't going to be easy. Michael had never made important things easy. I straightened my mind, already shifting, searching. The key. If he had locked it, then somewhere, there had to be a key. And suddenly, I remembered something. A small, almost insignificant detail from years ago. A place Michael used to keep things he didn't want anyone else to find. My heart began to beat a little faster. Not from fear this time, but from anticipation. Because for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was moving forward, and whatever was hidden inside that cabinet, I was going to find a way to open it, no matter what it revealed. The memory didn't come all at once. It surfaced slowly like something rising from deep water, distorted at first, then sharper with every passing second. Michael in his study. That's where it began. I could see him clearly in my mind, sitting behind his old oak desk glasses low on his nose, flipping through paperwork with that quiet focus he always had. The room had always smelled faintly of cedar and ink, a scent that never quite left, no matter how many times I opened the windows. He was particular about that room, not secretive exactly, but careful. There were drawers he didn't like me to open, not because he didn't trust me, he always said that, but because in his words, everyone deserves a few corners of their life that remain their own. At the time, I respected that. Now I wondered what those corners had been hiding. I moved slowly toward the hallway, my footsteps echoing softly in the empty house. The study door was half open, just as it had been the morning the movers came through. They hadn't touched it much. Of course they hadn't. There was nothing obvious to take. No expensive furniture, no electronics, just shelves of books, old files, and a desk that looked like it belonged to another era. To them, it was useless. To me, it was the only place left that still felt like Michael. I stepped inside, pausing just over the threshold. For a moment, I let myself breathe. The air was different here, still, untouched. Like time had decided to linger a little longer in this room. My eyes moved across the shelves. First rows of neatly arranged books, some worn, some barely opened. Then to the framed certificates on the wall, reminders of a career Michael rarely spoke about in detail. And finally, to the desk. I approached it slowly, my fingers brushing against the surface as I circled around to the chair. I hesitated before sitting down. It felt personal. But then again, everything about this moment was. So I sat. The chair creaked softly beneath me the same way it always had. And suddenly, I was no longer in the present. I was years back. Michael sitting across from me, smiling faintly as I teased him about being overly organized. "You never know when something might matter," he had said. I remembered laughing. Now, I wasn't laughing anymore. I opened the top drawer first. Pens, notepads, old envelopes, nothing unusual. The second drawer held files neatly labeled, meticulously arranged. Insurance, taxes, bank statements, all in order, just like Michael. But none of it felt like what I was looking for. I closed it and moved to the third drawer. Locked. I paused my fingers, resting lightly on the small brass knob. Another lock. Another barrier. It should have frustrated me, but instead, it confirmed something. Michael had patterns. If he locked something important, he didn't leave the key far. I stood again, my eyes scanning the room more carefully this time. Think Grace. Where would he hide something not somewhere obvious, not somewhere anyone could stumble upon, somewhere meaningful? My gaze drifted to the bookshelf in the corner, the one he used most often. I walked over to it, running my fingers along the spines of the books. History, finance, law, subjects he had always been drawn to. Then I noticed it. A book slightly out of place. Not by much, just enough to catch my attention. I pulled it out slowly. It was heavier than it should have been. My heart began to beat faster. I opened it. The pages had been hollowed out, and inside, a small key. I stared at it for a long moment, my breath catching in my throat. He had hidden it, not carelessly, not randomly, but deliberately, carefully, as if he knew, as if he had always known this day might come. I closed my fingers around the key, the cool metal pressing into my palm. For a moment I didn't move, because holding it felt like crossing a line, not just into whatever the cabinet contained, but into a part of Michael's life he had chosen to keep from me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered softly. The room offered no answer, only silence. But this silence was different. It didn't feel empty. It felt full of things left unsaid, of truths waiting to be uncovered. I slipped the key into my pocket, my hand lingering there for a second longer than necessary. Then I turned toward the door. Each step back to the living room felt heavier than the last. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood the weight of what I was about to do. Once I opened that cabinet, there would be no going back. No pretending, no ignoring. Everything would become clear, for better or for worse. When I reached the living room, the cabinet was exactly where I had left it, unchanged, patient, waiting. I stood in front of it again, my hand slowly reaching into my pocket. The key felt colder now, or maybe that was just my imagination. I knelt down, bringing myself level with the lock. For a moment I hesitated, not because I doubted what I was doing, but because I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to consider before. Michael hadn't just protected whatever was inside this cabinet from the world. He had protected it from Daniel, from Olivia, from anyone who might try to take advantage of it, which meant whatever was inside was never meant for them. It was meant for me. The thought settled into my chest with a quiet, steady certainty. I took a slow breath, then another, and finally, I lifted the key. The metal scraped softly as I guided it toward the lock. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. My fingers tightened slightly as I held it in place. One turn. That was all it would take. One small movement to unlock everything. I closed my eyes briefly. "All right, Michael," I whispered. "I'm ready." Then I opened them again and turned the key. The sound of the lock turning was softer than I expected, a quiet, almost delicate click. And yet, it echoed through the room like something irreversible. For a moment I didn't move. My hand remained on the key, my breath held somewhere between anticipation and hesitation. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something heavier. The awareness that whatever waited behind those doors would change how I saw everything. Michael, Daniel, myself. Slowly I pulled the key free. The cabinet stood in front of me now, no longer sealed, no longer hidden. Just wood and hinges and the quiet promise of truth. "All right," I whispered again, though this time my voice was steadier. I reached for the handle and opened it. The doors creaked softly as they parted. Inside was not what I expected. No jewelry, no cash, no dramatic secrets waiting to spill out, just files. Neatly stacked, organized, labeled. For a second I felt almost foolish. Had I imagined all of this? Had I built up some great mystery around something as ordinary as paperwork? But then I saw the names. My name, Grace Barnes, and beneath it, legal trust documents. My fingers trembled as I reached inside and lifted the top folder. The paper felt heavier than it should have, or maybe that was just me. I opened it carefully, my eyes scanning the first page. The words blurred together, at first legal language clauses, dates. But then something sharpened. A phrase that stood out: irrevocable living trust. I frowned slightly, turning the page. More details, more terms, and then a line that made my breath catch. Primary beneficiary Grace Barnes. I blinked, once, twice, reading it again to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. Primary beneficiary, me, not Daniel. Not shared, not conditional. Me. My heart began to pound as I flipped through the rest of the document. The house, the property, the accounts connected to it. Everything had been placed into this trust. Years ago, signed, witnessed, final. And then I saw it. A separate section, a clause, clear, direct. No transfer, sale, or reassignment of property may occur without the explicit written consent of the primary beneficiary. My hand tightened around the paper. They couldn't sell the house. Not without me. Not without my approval. And I had never given it. A strange, disbelieving laugh escaped my lips. All this time, all their planning, all their pressure, it had meant nothing. Because legally, they had no power here. I set the document down slowly, my mind racing. This is why. This is why they avoided the cabinet. This is why Daniel couldn't open it. Because whatever was inside it was the one thing that could stop them. I reached back into the cabinet, pulling out the next folder. More documents, more confirmations. Everything aligned. Everything pointed to the same truth. Michael had protected me. Not just in theory. Not just emotionally, legally, completely. And then, at the bottom of the stack, I saw it. An envelope, plain, unmarked except for one thing: my name, written in Michael's handwriting, Grace. My chest tightened as I picked it up. This wasn't a legal document. This was something else, something personal. My fingers hesitated on the edge of the envelope. For a moment I considered putting it down, saving it, waiting, but I knew I wouldn't. I needed to know. Carefully I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes already stinging before I had even read a word. And then I saw his handwriting. Familiar, steady, unmistakably his. My Grace. The words alone were enough to make my breath hitch. I swallowed hard and kept reading. If you're reading this, it means something I feared may have already happened. I stopped. My heart pounded louder in my ears. Feared. Michael. What did you know? I forced myself to continue. I didn't want to burden you with this while I was still here. You deserved peace, not worry. But I also couldn't ignore what I was beginning to see. My hands trembled now, beginning to see what Daniel has always had: a good heart. But he also has a weakness I hoped he would outgrow. A tendency to take the easiest path when things become difficult. Tears blurred my vision. I blinked them away, trying to keep reading. I've seen signs, small at first, then harder to ignore. Financial decisions that didn't make sense, risks taken without thought, and more recently, a willingness to rely on others instead of standing on his own. My chest ached. This wasn't anger in his words. It wasn't judgment. It was sadness. I pray I'm wrong. I truly do. But if I'm not, then I need to know you're protected. A tear slipped down my cheek. Protected. That's what this had been. Not secrecy, not control. Protection. This trust ensures that no one, not even our son, can make decisions about your home or your future without your full consent. I closed my eyes briefly. He had known. Not everything, but enough. Enough to prepare. Enough to protect. I opened my eyes again and continued. If Daniel ever finds himself in trouble, I hope he comes to you honestly. Not through pressure, not through manipulation, but through truth. My grip tightened on the letter. That hadn't happened, not even close. And if he doesn't, then I trust you to do what is right. Even if it's difficult. Even if it hurts. My breath shook, because I already knew. It would hurt. You are stronger than you think, Grace. You always have been. The tears came freely now, Not just from the pain, but from the recognition, from the understanding. He had seen me, even when I hadn't seen myself. Whatever happens, remember this love does not mean surrender. The words settled into me like something solid, something unshakable. I love you. Always, Michael. The room was silent again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of truth, full of clarity, full of something I hadn't felt in days. Strength. I lowered the letter slowly, my hand still trembling, but not with fear this time, with something else. Resolve. Because now I understood everything. Daniel hadn't just been careless, he had chosen this path. Olivia hadn't just influenced him, she had pushed him. And together, they had tried to take something that was never theirs. I looked down at the documents again, at the proof, at the protection Michael had left for me, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt something shift completely inside me. Not confusion, not hesitation, certainty. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would sign. They thought I would step aside. They were wrong, very wrong. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I gathered the documents, holding them close for a moment before setting them down beside me. My eyes drifted toward the front door. They would come back. Of course they would, expecting everything to be settled, expecting me to follow, expecting me to comply. I let out a slow breath. This time, they were going to find something very different waiting for them. I didn't call Daniel, not right away. For the first time since all of this began, I wasn't reacting to them anymore. I wasn't defending, explaining, or trying to keep the peace. I was thinking, planning, and that was something they hadn't quite accounted for. I sat on the floor beside the open cabinet, the documents spread carefully in front of me, the trust papers, the letter, every piece of proof Michael had left behind, every safeguard he had built quietly without ever asking for recognition. He hadn't just protected me from strangers. He had protected me from the possibility of betrayal, from within my own family. I let that settle in for a moment. Then I reached for my phone. Not Daniel, not Olivia. Mr. Whitaker. The call rang twice before he answered. Grace. His voice carried a note of surprise. It's been a while. It has, I replied, steadying my tone. I need your help. There was a brief pause, just enough for him to understand the seriousness behind my words. What's going on? I found the trust documents Michael set up, I said. The ones regarding the house. Another pause. Longer this time. I was wondering when you might come across those, he said finally. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. You knew I helped draft them, he replied gently. Michael wanted to make sure you were protected no matter what. A quiet breath escaped me. Then you know what they say. I do. And you know Daniel has been trying to sell the house. Silence. Then carefully. Do you have proof of that? Yes. Good, he said, his tone shifting, becoming more focused, more precise. Then you're in a strong position, strong. The word felt unfamiliar. But I need to be sure, I continued. There's no way they can move forward without my consent. None, he said firmly. The trust is airtight. The property is legally under your control. Any attempt to sell or transfer it without your authorization would be invalid and potentially actionable. Actionable. I hadn't thought that far. Not yet. What should I do? I asked. There was no hesitation this time. You document everything he said, every conversation, every piece of paper, every attempt they make to pressure you. And when you're ready, you confront them. My eyes drifted toward the front door again. Ready. I wasn't sure if I was, but I knew one thing. I was closer than I had been before. I think they're going to come back, I said quietly. They probably will, Mr. Whitaker replied. And when they do, you need to be clear, calm, and firm. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I can do that. I know you can, he said. Michael knew it too. The words lingered after the call ended. Michael knew it too. I looked down at the letter again, tracing the edge of the envelope with my thumb. Love does not mean surrender. I stood slowly gathering the documents and placing them neatly back into the cabinet, except for one copy of the trust papers, which I kept with me. Then I closed the doors, locked them, and slipped the key back into my pocket. Not hidden, not forgotten, ready. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt steady, grounded, like something had shifted back into place. Hours passed. I didn't rush. I cleaned what little there was left to clean, wiped down counters that no longer held anything, straightened spaces that no longer needed straightening, not because it mattered, but because it gave me time. Time to think, time to prepare, time to let the weight of everything settle into something I could carry. By the time I heard the car pull into the driveway, the sun had already begun to set. Golden light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the bare floors. I stood in the living room waiting, this time not as someone being forced out, but as someone standing her ground. The front door opened without a knock. Of course it did. Daniel stepped in first, his expression cautious. Olivia followed her posture, composed as always, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. They both paused when they saw me, standing there, waiting. "You didn't come," Daniel said, a hint of confusion in his voice. "I know," I replied calmly. Olivia's gaze flicked around the room, taking in the unchanged state of the house. "You didn't finish packing," she observed. "There's nothing left to pack," I said. A brief silence settled between us. Then Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, we talked about this. The truck is all ready." "I know what you talked about," I interrupted gently. He stopped. Something in my tone made him hesitate. "Then you understand why this needs to happen," he said, trying to regain control of the conversation. I met his eyes. For the first time in weeks, I didn't look away. "No," I said. "I understand why you want it to happen." The distinction hung in the air. Olivia crossed her arms slightly. "This isn't about wants, Grace," she said. "It's about what's necessary." "For you," I replied. "For all of us," she corrected. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said again, "not for all of us." Daniel's frustration surfaced quickly this time. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "We're trying to fix things." "By taking something that isn't yours," I asked. His expression faltered. Just for a second, then Olivia stepped in. "Daniel," she said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. "Let me—" She turned to me, her voice softer now, controlled, persuasive. "Grace, we're under a lot of pressure right now," she said. "We need to make smart decisions. This house, I interrupted, is not yours to decide about." The room went still, completely still, because something had changed, not just in what I was saying, but in how I was saying it. Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" she asked. I held her gaze. "It means," I said evenly, "you don't have the authority you think you do." Daniel let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Mom, come on. Don't start this. We've already—" "No," I said firmer this time. "You've already assumed." He went quiet, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty. Real uncertainty, not irritation, not impatience, but doubt. I reached into my pocket slowly. Not for the letter, not yet. Just enough movement to shift the balance, to let them feel it, to let them realize. Something had changed. "You should sit down," I said calmly. Neither of them moved, but neither of them spoke either. And in that silence, I knew. The moment was coming. The one Michael had prepared me for, the one I hadn't been ready for before. But now I was. They didn't sit down. Of course they didn't. Daniel stood where he was, his shoulders tight, his jaw set in that familiar way he had when he was trying to stay in control. Olivia remained just behind him. Her posture composed, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see it now. The calculation, the shift. They knew something had changed. They just didn't know what. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice strained. "Whatever this is, we don't have time for games." I almost smiled. Games. If only he understood. "This isn't a game," I said calmly. "Not anymore." Olivia stepped forward slightly, her tone soft but edged with impatience. "Grace, we've already made arrangements. The house is being prepared for listing. The sooner we finalize everything, the better it will be for everyone involved. Finalize everything." Such clean words for something so invasive. I tilted my head just slightly. "Is that what you think is happening?" I asked. Her eyes flickered. "Just for a moment." "What do you mean?" she replied. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked past them slowly, deliberately, and sat down in one of the only chairs left in the room. The sound of the wood against the floor echoed in the empty space, drawing their attention back to me. "Close the door," I said. Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because this is a private conversation," I replied, "and I would prefer not to have the neighbors listening." There was something in my tone that made him hesitate. Then reluctantly he turned and pushed the door shut. The soft click of the latch echoed through the house. Final. Contained. I folded my hands in my lap, looking at them both. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I broke the silence. "How much do you owe?" The question landed like a stone. Daniel blinked. Olivia's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened instantly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. I held her gaze. "Yes," I replied quietly. "You do." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, this isn't $187,000, I continued. That did it. The air in the room changed completely. Daniel's face went pale. Olivia's composure cracked not entirely, but enough. "How did you?" Daniel started. "I looked," I said simply. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room before stopping again. "You shouldn't have done that," he muttered. I let out a small breath. "And you shouldn't have tried to sell my house without telling me." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Olivia recovered first. "We weren't trying to hide anything," she said, her voice steady again. "We were trying to solve a problem." "By creating another one," I replied. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This house has value," she continued. "It's an asset that can help all of us move forward." "No," I said. "It's an asset that helps you." Daniel stepped forward. Frustration spilling over now. "Why are you making this so difficult?" he demanded. "We're in trouble, Mom. Real trouble. This isn't about greed, it's about survival." I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for a moment, I saw the boy again. The fear, the desperation, but behind it, there was something else. Something he had chosen. "You should have come to me," I said softly. He froze. "I would have helped you." I continued. "I would have listened. I would have tried to find a way." His eyes dropped, but instead I said, my voice tightening slightly. "You tried to take it." Olivia stepped in again, her tone sharper now. "We didn't take anything," she said. "Nothing has been finalized yet." "That's true," I replied. I reached into my pocket, and this time, I didn't stop. I pulled out the folded document and placed it on the small table beside me, the trust papers. Daniel's eyes followed the movement. Olivia's too. "What is that?" she asked. I met her gaze. "Something you should have asked about before you started making plans." I unfolded the document, slowly smoothing it out with my hands. The sound of the paper seemed louder than it should have been. Then I turned it toward them. "Go ahead," I said. "Read it." Neither of them moved at first. Then Daniel stepped forward, his expression uncertain. He picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second, and as he read, I watched the change. Confusion, then disbelief, then something sharper. "No," he said under his breath. Olivia moved beside him, looking over his shoulder. Her eyes moved quickly across the text, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely shaken. "That's not," she began. "It is," I said calmly. Daniel looked up at me, his face pale. This says I know what it says," I replied. He swallowed hard. "You can't be serious." "I am." Olivia took the paper from his hands, reading more carefully now. "This must be outdated," she said quickly. "Or incomplete. There's no way it's current," I interrupted. "And it's complete." Her gaze snapped to mine. "You expect us to believe that you've had this the entire time?" she asked. "I didn't have it," I said. "Not until today." That made her pause. "Then how Michael?" I said simply. The room fell silent again, because that name still carried weight, still carried authority, even now. Daniel shook his head slightly. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Why wouldn't he tell me?" "Because it wasn't meant for you," I replied. The words landed harder than anything else I had said. He flinched. Olivia's jaw tightened. "This doesn't change anything," she said quickly. "We can still—" "No," I said, firmer now. And this time, there was no softness left in my voice. "You can't." She stared at me. "Legally," I continued, "this house cannot be sold, transferred, or reassigned without my explicit written consent." Daniel's grip on the edge of the table tightened. "And you're not giving it," he said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. The words settled into the room like something solid, final, unmovable. Olivia exhaled sharply, stepping back. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "There has to be a way around this." "There isn't," I replied. Daniel looked at me again. This time there was no anger in his expression, no frustration, just something breaking. "You'd really do this?" he asked quietly. I held his gaze. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm protecting what's mine." The distinction mattered, even if he didn't want to see it. For a long moment no one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy, uncomfortable, real. And then finally, I reached for the envelope. The one I hadn't shown them yet, the one that mattered even more than the documents. "There's something else," I said. Both of them looked at me. And this time, neither of them tried to interrupt, because now they were listening. The envelope felt heavier than the documents, not in weight, but in meaning. I held it between my fingers for a moment, watching both of them carefully. Daniel's eyes were fixed on it, uncertain. Olivia's expression was tighter now, controlled but no longer calm. "What is that?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at Daniel. "This," I said quietly, "is from your father." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, then discomfort. "Why didn't you show me that before?" he asked. "Because I hadn't read it," I replied. That was only part of the truth. The other part was that I hadn't been ready, but now I was. I slid my finger under the edge of the envelope again and pulled the letter out, unfolding it slowly. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from the weight of what it carried. "I think you should hear this," I said. Olivia shifted beside him. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It is," I interrupted gently. And for the first time since she had entered this house, she stopped talking. I looked back down at the page. Michael's handwriting, familiar, steady, unchanged by time. And I began to read. "My Grace." My voice caught slightly on the words, but I continued. "If you're reading this, it means something I feared may have already happened." I glanced up briefly. Daniel was watching me now. His expression guarded. Olivia stood still, her arms crossed, her attention sharp. "I didn't want to burden you with this while I was still here. You deserved peace, not worry. But I also couldn't ignore what I was beginning to see." Daniel shifted again, a small movement, but enough. Daniel has always had a good heart. I read my voice softer now, but he also has a weakness I hoped he would outgrow, a tendency to take the easiest path when things become difficult. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom," he started. "Let me finish," I said quietly. He fell silent. Not because he wanted to, but because something in him needed to hear it. I've seen signs, small at first, then harder to ignore. Financial decisions that didn't make sense, risks taken without thought, and more recently, a willingness to rely on others instead of standing on his own. I paused briefly, letting the words settle. Daniel looked away. Olivia didn't. Her gaze remained fixed on me, her expression unreadable. "I pray I'm wrong, I truly do." My voice softened even further. "But if I'm not, then I need to know you're protected." The room felt smaller now, quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. This trust ensures that no one, not even our son, can make decisions about your home or your future without your full consent. I lowered the paper slightly, just enough to look at Daniel. He wasn't angry, not yet. He looked confused, hurt, like something he hadn't expected to feel had found its way through anyway. "If Daniel ever finds himself in trouble," I continued, "I hope he comes to you honestly, not through pressure, not through manipulation, but through truth." That word lingered. Truth. Because that was the one thing that had been missing from everything they had done. And if he doesn't, Then I trust you to do what is right, even if it's difficult, even if it hurts. My voice faltered slightly, because it did hurt, more than I had allowed myself to admit. You are stronger than you think, Grace. You always have been. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I didn't wipe it away. I let it fall, because it belonged there. Whatever happens, remember this love does not mean surrender. The words hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable, final. I love you, always. Michael's silence. Not the hollow silence from before, but something deeper, something filled with everything that had just been said and everything that hadn't. I folded the letter slowly, my hands steady again. Then I placed it back into the envelope. Neither of them spoke. Not right away. Daniel was the first to break. That's not fair, he said quietly. I looked at him, which part I asked. His eyes met mine. All of it, he said. He didn't even give me a chance. A part of me wanted to soften, to reach for him, to comfort him the way I always had. But I didn't. Not this time. He gave you years, Daniel, I said gently. More than you realize. He shook his head. You don't understand, he said. Things got complicated. I didn't mean for any of this to what I asked. He stopped, because there was no simple answer, no clean explanation. Olivia stepped forward, then her composure finally slipping just enough to reveal the frustration underneath. This doesn't change the situation, she said. We're still in debt. We still need a solution. I turned to her. And you thought the solution was to take this house? I said. We thought it was the most logical option, she corrected. For you, I replied. She exhaled sharply. You're being emotional about this. I almost laughed. Emotional, as if that were a weakness, as if that were the problem. No, I said calmly. I'm being clear. Daniel looked between us, his expression tightening. So what happens now? He asked. There it was. The question that mattered. The one neither of them had asked before, because until now, they thought they already knew the answer. I stood slowly, the letter still in my hand. What happens now, I said, is that you both stop making decisions about my life. Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line, and the house, she asked. I held her gaze. The house stays exactly where it is, I said. Daniel closed his eyes briefly as if trying to process that. And us, he asked. That question was harder. Because it wasn't about documents or ownership or control. It was about something deeper, something more fragile. I looked at him for a long moment, at the man he had become, at the choices he had made, at the line he had crossed. And then I answered. That, I said quietly, depends on what you do next. The words hung between us. Not a threat, not a punishment, but a truth. Because for the first time, the decision wasn't mine alone. It was his. And whatever he chose would determine everything that came after. The silence didn't last long. It never does when the truth finally lands. Olivia was the first to move. Of course she was. She let out a sharp breath, pacing once across the room, before turning back to me, her composure no longer as polished as before. This is unbelievable, she said. You're seriously going to let us drown over a technicality. A technicality, I repeated. Daniel flinched slightly at my tone. Yes, Olivia pressed on. A piece of paper. That's all this is. Meanwhile, we're dealing with real consequences, real debt, real pressure. And whose responsibility is that? I asked. Cutting in. Her eyes flashed. You think this is just our fault, she shot back. You think life is that simple? No, I said calmly. I think choices are. That landed harder than I expected, because for a moment she didn't respond. Daniel stepped forward, then his voice lower, strained. Mom, please, he said. We're not asking for everything. Just help us get through this. We can figure the rest out later. I studied his face. There it was again. Desperation. But now, something else had joined it. Doubt. He wasn't as certain anymore. Not after the letter. Not after the truth. You already tried to figure it out, I said quietly. Without me. He swallowed. I didn't know how to tell you, he admitted. That didn't stop you from acting, I replied. He looked away. Olivia didn't. She stepped closer, her voice lowering into something more controlled, more strategic. "Grace," she said, "let's be realistic. You don't need a house this big anymore. You said it yourself. It's hard to manage alone. Selling it isn't taking something from you. It's making things easier. Easier. The same word they had been using from the beginning. I shook my head slowly. "You keep saying that," I said. "But everything you've done has made things harder." Her expression tightened. "That's because you're resisting," she snapped. "No," I replied. "It's because you never asked." That was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably, because Olivia didn't argue back. Not immediately. Instead, she turned to Daniel. "This isn't going anywhere," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to think about next steps. Next steps. As if this were still a negotiation. As if I were still something to work around." Daniel hesitated. For the first time since this began, he didn't follow her lead right away. "Olivia," he said quietly. She looked at him surprised. "What?" He ran a hand through his hair, again pacing once before stopping. This isn't how I wanted it to go," he said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Then how did you want it to go?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Because there wasn't a simple answer. There never had been. I thought—" He started, then stopped. I watched him carefully, because this was the moment, the one Michael had written about, the one that would show me who my son really was. I thought we could fix everything he said finally, that if we just handled it, it would all work out. "Handled it?" I echoed softly. He winced. "Yeah," he admitted. "I know how that sounds." Olivia stepped closer to him, her tone sharpening again. "No, Daniel," she said. "What sounds wrong is giving up now. We are too far into this to just walk away." "Walk away," he repeated. "From what?" "From a plan that doesn't even work anymore." Her expression hardened. "It works if she agrees," she said, nodding toward me. I met her gaze. "I don't," I said simply. That ended it. Whatever control she had been trying to maintain slipped completely. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising now. "Do you have any idea what this means for us?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "It means you have to find another way." "There is no other way," she snapped. "There is," I said. "It just doesn't involve taking something that isn't yours." Daniel stepped between us, then his voice louder than before. "Enough," he said. Both of us turned to him. He stood there breathing heavily, his composure finally breaking. "I can't do this," he said. "Not like this." Olivia stared at him. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means this isn't right," he said. The words hung in the air. Simple, clear, and long overdue. Her expression shifted shock first, then anger. "Now you're backing out," she demanded. "After everything we've done." He shook his head. "I'm not backing out," he said. "I'm realizing we shouldn't have started this in the first place." "That's not helpful," she shot back. "It's honest," he replied. That word again, honest. The same word Michael had written. The same word that had been missing from everything until now. Olivia let out a frustrated laugh. "Honest doesn't fix debt, Daniel," she said. "Honest doesn't stop the bank from coming after us." "No," he said quietly. "But this doesn't either." She stared at him, disbelief written across her face. Then she turned to me. "You did this," she said. I didn't react, because I knew better now. "This isn't about me," I said. "This is about the choices you both made." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were directed at me, soft, uncertain, but real. And for a moment, I didn't know what to do with them, because part of me wanted to accept them immediately, to forgive, to move on. But another part, the part that had been ignored, dismissed, and pushed aside for weeks, held back. "I believe you're sorry," I said gently. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "But that doesn't undo what happened," I continued. The hope dimmed. "Not completely, but enough." "I know," he said. And this time, he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just accepted it. Olivia didn't. She stepped back, shaking her head. "This is a mistake," she said, "all of it." Then she turned and walked toward the door. Olivia Daniel called after her. She didn't stop. The door opened, then closed, and just like that, she was gone. The house fell quiet again. But this silence was different from the others. It wasn't tense. It wasn't uncertain. It was aftermath. Daniel stood there for a long moment staring at the door she had just walked through. Then he turned back to me. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. I looked at him, really looked at him, not as the boy he had been, not as the stranger he had become, but as the man standing in front of me now, flawed, lost, but finally facing the truth. "That's a start," I said quietly. He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. "What happens now?" he asked. I took a slow breath, because this part was just as important as everything that came before. Now I said, "You figure out how to fix this, without taking from someone else." He nodded again, slower this time, more certain, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in him that I recognized. Not desperation, not avoidance, but responsibility. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was something. And sometimes, something is where everything begins. The house felt different after Olivia left. Not quieter, there had already been too much silence for that, but clearer, like something heavy had finally shifted, even if it hadn't fully lifted. Daniel didn't move right away. He stood there near the center of the room, staring at the door she had just walked through, as if expecting her to come back and tell him what to do next. When she didn't, he turned to me. "I didn't think it would go like that," he said. His voice sounded smaller now. Not the voice of someone in control, not the voice of someone with a plan, just a man who had run out of answers. "Neither did I replied. That wasn't entirely true. A part of me had sensed this outcome from the beginning, but I hadn't wanted to believe it. He nodded slowly, then ran his hands over his face, exhaling deeply. "I messed this up," he admitted. I didn't rush to comfort him. That would have been the old me, the version of me who softened every consequence before it could settle. Instead, I let the truth sit between us. "Yes," I said quietly. The word didn't carry anger. It didn't need to. It was enough on its own. Daniel swallowed his eyes, drifting around the room, the empty walls, the bare floors, the cabinet standing silently in the corner. I thought I was fixing things, he said. I really did. "I believe you," I replied. That made him look up. "But intention doesn't erase impact," I added. He flinched slightly. Again. Not from the words themselves, but from the weight behind them. A knock at the door broke the moment. Sharp, unexpected. Daniel glanced at me. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he said. "Neither was I replied, but I already had a feeling." He moved toward the door and opened it. Mr. Whitaker stood on the porch, neat as always, his expression calm but serious. "Good evening," he said, stepping inside after Daniel moved aside. His eyes landed on me first. "Grace." "Thank you for coming," I said. Daniel looked between us, confusion settling in again. "What is this?" he asked. Mr. Whitaker turned to him, his tone polite but direct. "My name is Arthur Whitaker," he said. "I was your father's attorney." Daniel stiffened slightly. "I know who you are," he said. "Good," Mr. Whitaker replied. "Then you understand why I'm here." Daniel's gaze flicked toward me. "You called him?" he asked. "Yes," I said simply. He let out a short breath, something between frustration and resignation. "Of course you did." Mr. Whitaker stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space in a way that felt stabilizing, professional, grounded. "This doesn't have to be complicated," he said, "but it does need to be clear." Daniel crossed his arms, clear about what he asked. "About the ownership and control of this property," Mr. Whitaker replied, "and about what actions are legally permissible moving forward." Daniel's jaw tightened again. "I already saw the papers," he said. "I get it." "Do you?" Mr. Whitaker asked calmly. The question wasn't confrontational, but it was firm. Daniel hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "No," he admitted. Mr. Whitaker nodded once. "Then let me explain," he said. He turned slightly, addressing both of us now. "The property in question," he began, "is held within an irrevocable living trust established by Michael Barnes. The primary beneficiary of that trust is Grace Barnes." I watched Daniel closely as he listened, not just to the words, but to the authority behind them. This means Mr. Whitaker continued that no sale transfer or modification of ownership can occur without her explicit written consent. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I know," he said. "She told me." "I'm glad," Mr. Whitaker replied, "because any attempt to bypass that, whether intentional or otherwise, would not only be invalid, but could expose you to legal consequences." That got his attention. "What kind of consequences?" he asked. Mr. Whitaker didn't hesitate. "Fraud, coercion, misrepresentation," he said evenly, "depending on the circumstances." The words settled heavily in the room. Daniel looked down. His shoulders dropped slightly. "I didn't—" He started, then stopped, because there was no way to finish that sentence without facing the truth. "I didn't think it would go that far," he said quietly. "It doesn't have to," Mr. Whitaker replied. "Not if you stop now." Daniel nodded, slowly, as if each movement required effort. "I am stopping," he said. "I already told her. I'm done with this." Mr. Whitaker glanced at me briefly. I gave a small nod. "He has," I confirmed. There was a pause. Then Mr. Whitaker shifted his focus slightly. "Then the next step is simple," he said. "You return anything that was taken or prepared for transfer. You cease any attempts to list or market the property, and you respect the terms of the trust moving forward." Daniel let out a long breath. "Okay," he said. "No argument, no resistance, just acceptance. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't immediate redemption. But it was real." "What about the movers?" he asked after a moment. "The stuff that's already been taken." "We'll arrange for it to be returned," I said. He nodded again. "I'll handle it," he said. Mr. Whitaker studied him for a moment, then gave a small approving nod. That would be wise. Another silence settled over the room. But this one felt different. Not tense, not uncertain, resolved, at least in part. Daniel looked at me again. "I'll fix this," he said. It wasn't a promise. Not exactly. It was more like a commitment, tentative, fragile, but sincere. "I hope you do," I replied. Because I did, not just for me, but for him, for whatever part of him still had the chance to become something better than what I had seen in the past few weeks. Mr. Whitaker gathered his things. "I'll follow up with you tomorrow, Grace," he said. "We'll make sure everything is properly documented." "Thank you," I said. He nodded once more, then turned and left. The door closed behind him. And just like that, it was just the two of us again. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, glancing once more at the empty room. "I should go," he said. I didn't stop him. Not this time. "Okay," I replied. He hesitated near the door, then looked back at me. "I am sorry," he said again. I held his gaze. "I know," I said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a beginning. He nodded once, then opened the door and stepped outside. This time, he closed it gently behind him, and when the sound of his car faded into the distance, I stood alone in the house again. But this time, it didn't feel like something had been taken from me. It felt like something had been returned. The first night alone in the house should have felt overwhelming. 3 days earlier it had, but now it felt different. Not full. Not yet, but no longer empty. There's a difference between something being taken from you and something being returned after you thought it was gone forever. I stood in the living room as the evening settled in, watching the last of the sunlight fade through the windows. The walls were still bare, the furniture was still missing, the house still echoed with every small movement, but this time, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. Space to rebuild, space to breathe, space to decide what stayed and what didn't. I walked slowly through each room again, not as someone trying to hold on to what had been, but as someone beginning to understand what could be. The kitchen came first. I opened the cabinets knowing they were empty, and yet still needing to see it for myself. My fingers traced along the shelves, remembering where everything used to be. The chipped mug Michael loved, the set of plates we had bought on a trip years ago, the drawer that always stuck unless you pulled it just right. All of it gone, but not lost, not anymore, because this time it wasn't being taken from me. It was simply waiting to return. That thought surprised me. Waiting. Not everything had to be rebuilt from nothing. Some things could come back, slowly, carefully, on my terms. I moved into the living room, next stopping where the cabinet still stood. I hadn't moved it. Not yet. It didn't feel like something that belonged in storage. It felt like something that belonged exactly where it was, a reminder, a line that had been drawn. I rested my hand on top of it briefly. "Thank you," I murmured softly, not just to Michael, but to the part of myself that had finally listened, that had finally stood still long enough to see what was happening, and chosen not to look away. Upstairs, the bedroom still felt the most unfamiliar, but even that I was beginning to change. I opened the closet slowly, half expecting to see it empty again, but it wasn't. Not completely. A few things remained, items Olivia hadn't deemed worth taking. A pair of old shoes, a coat I hadn't worn in years, and tucked in the back, the quilt. My breath caught. I stepped forward, quickly pulling it free. The fabric was soft beneath my fingers, the stitching still strong despite the years. My mother's work, her hands, her care. I held it close for a moment, pressing it against my chest. Not everything had been erased. Not everything had been taken. Some things had survived, and maybe so had I. I made the bed that night with the quilt. No white comforter, no modern touches, just something real, something mine. When I lay down, the room still felt quiet, but it wasn't cold anymore. It felt honest. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because something inside me had shifted. There was no schedule being imposed, no decisions being made for me, no one watching, no one directing. Just me. I made coffee the way Michael used to, stronger than I preferred, but familiar enough to feel comforting. I stood by the window as I drank it, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. Cars passing, neighbors stepping outside, normal, uncomplicated. I had missed that. Later that day, Helen came over. She didn't knock right away, just stood on the porch for a moment as if giving me the chance to decide whether I was ready for company. I opened the door before she could. "I was hoping you'd come," I said. She smiled softly. "I figured you might need a friend." We sat in the living room on folding chairs this time because that's all I had, and somehow it didn't matter. "You look different," she said after a while. I raised an eyebrow. "Different, how stronger," she replied. "I considered that. I feel clearer," I said. She nodded. "That makes sense." I told her everything, not just the facts, but the feelings, the confusion, the hurt. The moment everything shifted, she listened without interrupting, without judging, and when I finished, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said. I let that sink in, because for the first time, I believed it. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. One by one, things began to return. The movers came back first, unloading boxes with the same efficiency they had used to take them away. This time, I directed them. Not Olivia, not Daniel. Me. "Kitchen goes here," I said. "Careful with that box. That one stays upstairs." Simple instructions, but they mattered because they were mine. Daniel came with them. He didn't say much, just worked, carried boxes, followed directions. There was no tension, no argument, just distance. And maybe that was necessary. Healing doesn't always happen together. Sometimes it starts apart. At one point, he paused near the doorway. "I talked to the bank," he said quietly. "We're working out a payment plan." I nodded. "That's good." He hesitated. "I should have done that sooner." "Yes," I said. No anger, just truth. He accepted it with a small nod. Before he left, he looked around the house. Not like someone planning, not like someone calculating, but but like someone seeing it for the first time. "It looks right," he said. I followed his gaze, the furniture back in place, the photos returned to the walls, the small details that made the space feel like a home again. "It is," I replied. He nodded once more, then left, not with certainty, not with resolution, but with something else, understanding. That night, I stood in the living room again. Everything wasn't perfect. Some things were still missing. Some things always would be. But the house felt alive again. Not because of the furniture, not because of the objects, but because of something deeper. Choice. I had chosen to stay, chosen to stand, chosen to protect what mattered, and in doing that, I had found something I didn't realize I had lost, myself. It took weeks before the house felt like mine again, not because the furniture hadn't been returned, it had, not because the walls were still bare, they weren't, but because ownership isn't just about what you can touch. It's about what you choose to hold on to, and what you finally decide to let go. I didn't rush that process. For the first time in a long time, I allowed things to unfold at their own pace. Mornings became quiet rituals again. Coffee by the window, the sound of birds returning to the trees Michael had planted years ago, the slow reintroduction of life into spaces that had once felt hollow. I started small, one room at a time. The kitchen first, then the living room, then the bedroom. Each decision deliberate, each choice mine. Some things I put back exactly where they had always been. Others, I changed. Not because Olivia had been right, but because I was finally asking myself what I wanted, not what I had always accepted. That was the difference. That was the shift. The cabinet stayed. I didn't move it back to the wall. I left it where it had stood that day in the center of the room for a while, then eventually near the window where the light could reach it. Not hidden, not forgotten. A quiet reminder, not of betrayal, but of truth, of clarity. Of a line that had been drawn and would never be erased. Daniel came by occasionally, never unannounced, never assuming, always asking first. "Is it okay if I stop by?" he would say. And sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I didn't. That too was new. The first time he visited after everything had settled, he stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary, as if waiting for permission to breathe. "You can come in," I said. He nodded, stepping inside carefully. Like he was entering a space that mattered. Like he understood now that it wasn't just a house. We didn't talk about everything right away. We talked about small things, the weather, the garden, the way the kitchen faucet still dripped if you didn't turn it just right. Normal things, safe things. But even in those small moments, something deeper was happening. Trust wasn't returning, not yet. But something else was. Respect. And sometimes, that's where trust begins again. Olivia didn't come back. Not at first. I heard from Daniel that she had moved in with a friend for a while, that things between them were strained. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Some consequences unfold on their own, and some answers don't need to be spoken out loud. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Not legal, not official, just an envelope with my name written across the front. In handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page. "Grace," it began. No warmth, no softness, just direct. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say this." I read the rest in silence. She didn't apologize the way I expected. There were no excuses, no attempts to justify what had happened, just acknowledgement. "I thought I was doing what was necessary," she wrote. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, things would fall into place. I didn't consider what it would cost you or what it would do to Daniel." I paused there, because that was the first honest thing she had ever said. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter continued, "but I do understand now that I crossed a line I can't undo." I folded the letter carefully when I finished, not because I agreed with everything she had said, but because I recognized something in it, awareness. Late, incomplete, but real. I placed it in the cabinet, not as something to hold on to, but as something to remember. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means understanding. Weeks turned into months, the seasons shifted, and slowly, so did everything else. Daniel continued to show up, not perfectly, not consistently, but differently. He didn't ask for anything anymore. He offered time, effort, space, and little by little, I saw the change, not dramatic, not sudden, but steady. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, he spoke quietly. "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote," he said. I didn't interrupt. I didn't want to believe it at first, he continued. It felt like he had already decided who I was. I nodded slightly. "That must have been hard," I said. "It was," he admitted. "But I think I understand now." I waited. He looked down at his hands. I was taking the easy way, he said. I didn't want to deal with the consequences of my own choices. So I tried to fix it by taking something that wasn't mine. The honesty in his voice was different this time, not defensive, not forced, just real. "I'm trying to do better," he added. I looked at him, at the man he was becoming. Not perfect, not finished, but trying. "That's all I ever wanted," I said quietly. He nodded. We didn't say anything else after that. We didn't need to. Some things don't need to be resolved in words. They just need time. As for me, I didn't go back to the way things were. I didn't pretend none of it had happened, because it had, and it mattered. But I also didn't let it define everything that came after. I set boundaries, clear ones, firm ones, not out of anger, but out of understanding. Because love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't ask you to give up everything you are just to keep the peace. It stands, it holds, it protects, and sometimes it says no. The cabinet remains in the house, still locked. Not because there's anything left to discover, but because I've already found what I needed, the truth, the strength, the clarity. And every time I pass by it, I remember the moment everything changed. Not when my son tried to take my home, but when I chose not to let him. That was the moment I stopped losing things and started finding myself again. In the end, this story is not just about a house, a cabinet, or even betrayal. It's about something much deeper, knowing your worth and having the courage to protect it. Sometimes the people we love will disappoint us. Sometimes they will make choices that hurt us in ways we never imagined. But love does not mean losing yourself to keep others comfortable. It does not mean saying yes when everything inside you is telling you to stand your ground. True strength isn't loud. It doesn't always come with anger or dramatic moments. Sometimes it looks like quiet clarity, like choosing not to sign, like saying no with a steady voice, like trusting that you deserve respect even from your own family. And healing. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, in rebuilding trust, in setting boundaries, in allowing people to change but not at the cost of who you are. If this story touched you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand your ground in a difficult situation? Do you think Grace made the right choice? Share your feelings in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you believe in stories that remind us of our strength, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional journeys like this.